There are places beneath King's Landing where the air lies heavy as bruised fruit and the stones remember names no mouth has spoken in 100 years. In those places, the torches burn with a sour, hungry light, and any sound makes a second sound in answer, as if the city itself is listening. Qyburn liked such places. He walked them with a lantern cupped in his hand and the soft fall of his steps swallowed by dust. In the deeper vaults beneath the great September of Baylor, jars lined the passage like little glass monks in a cloister, each as tall as a man's thigh, each the color of summer apples left too long in the sun. A dry crackle lived inside them, like a wasp's nest. Even sealed, even cold, wildfire wanted waking. Qyburn put down the lantern and touched one jar softly, a caress through dust. His fingers came away green and powder-slick. "It will take the flame so prettily," he murmured, and the boy in the shadows nodded with that bright, private obedience Qyburn prized. One of his little birds, an orphan with milk teeth still loose. "The candles under the sept will burn to grease by mid-bell. The bells will be ringing so loud none will hear the hiss. The Lord's light again in the world. Eh." The boy smiled, a small moon of teeth. Qyburn turned his head. Even through damp stone, he could sense the vastness above him. The open nave, the columns, the stretch of voices and satin and hypocrisy. Trials and masks. The plan pleased him for its symmetry. Kings were made with fire at old Valyria, were they not? It seemed only fitting that queens confess with it. Cersei had asked him once whether the faith ever understood the word consequence. "They will," he had said. "Understanding comes quickest to those who burn." He had kissed her knuckles then, gently, and felt the pulse in her wrist. He lifted the lantern again and started back. The boy's feet patted the stones behind him, careful not to scuff. In the vault's far corner, an old bell rope hung like a withered vine. Qyburn brushed it with the back of his hand. He could almost taste the green when he closed his eyes. Green like the eye of a cat. Green like envy. Like the hope of the seven cut open and found hollow. He was 2 turns from the cellar door when he tilted his lantern and saw the footprints in dust that were not his. Someone else had been here. Not a rat or child, the stride was too long, the toe too light. Qyburn crouched, the old bones in his knees complaining, and pressed his fingers into the print. Recent. Moisture still clung in the dust. No one had the right to be here. No one but those he brought. He straightened, not quickly. His mouth settled in a certain line it wore when a corpse presented a curious puzzle. "Fetch me Ternesio," he told the boy. "Tell him to watch the north gate. No one goes in or out without a look beneath the skirt." The boy laughed softly, the joke a game for him, and darted away. Qyburn stood a long moment with his lantern hooded and his breath gathering a little cloud in the cool air, listening to the city listen to him. The raven arrived at Winterfell with snow still frozen to its feathers, as if it had flown through the spine of a cloud. Jon saw it banking against the gray of morning and knew it was Bran's before the bird settled on the sill. The handwriting was spare and straight as a spear haft. Some of the letters leaned where Bran's hurt hands had gone slowly. Cold had warped the parchment, but the meaning held. Under the sept of the big city he wrote, and 3 circles like eyes in a triangle. Fire that thinks itself God. A queen's shadow and bells. Do not let them ring. Jon read it twice and gave it to Sansa without speaking. The old gods sighed in the gods' wood, a tired sound. Sansa carried the parchment to the window and read, and some small part of her face, a corner of the mouth, a tendon at the throat, changed. "You think he's dreaming," Davos said. It was not quite question, not quite doubt. The smuggler squinted at the lines and rubbed his thumb along the edge of the parchment as if he might feel truth hidden there. "Boys dream, and the things he's seen, well. But sometimes the sea tells you a squall is coming by a smell alone. You don't wait on it to be polite." Sansa's eyes did not leave the shapes, the 3 circles like baubles in a child's drawing. "Wildfire." The word came out low. "You know it?" Jon asked. "Stannis's hand lost a son to it," Davos said before she could answer, and in his voice was the rough hollow of a wound that had scabbed and reopened too many winters. "Lost more than one. The stuff they bottled under the city in Aerys's time, and I'll not shame myself by calling him His Grace. That green piss burns water and men and hope, and it burns truth after. Jon looked at the parchment again. He could see Bran bent over it, the candlelight making a halo at the edges of his hair. Bran had changed since the wall fell. He had edges where a boy should be smooth. If he says it's there, Jon said simply. The resolve settled like a familiar cloak across his shoulders. We go. We, Sansa said, and one red brow lifted. You are king in the north. Then let your king go south with the fewest men possible and the hands that know the city. If he is wrong, I'll be a fool who returns with the story of a fool's errand. If he is right, Davos's mouth tightened. Then we're talking about a queen who means to burn her own capital with everyone in it rather than submit to the faith's justice. I never liked the gods with 7 faces. I like that even less. He looked at Jon. If I were you, I'd take a woman the queen trusts. Sansa looked away from the window as if she had expected that. The only woman Cersei ever trusted was herself, she said. But there is one she does not hate, not as she hates me. They looked to the door together as it opened. Brienne of Tarth turned her head to them, the pale hair pulled back from her strong face. She stood with a gravity that always made Jon think of ice thick enough to hold 1,000 men. Podrick hovered behind her, trying to make himself smaller. You sent for me, my lady? Brienne asked Sansa, eyes already scanning faces, trying to weigh threat. You told me once you had the ear of Ser Jaime Lannister, Sansa said. You told me because you are honest and don't keep secrets that might hurt us. Jon needs to meet him. Brienne's face moved only slightly. The capital is a nest of knives. We know, Jon said. We also know what happens if this is true and we do nothing. Davos went to the fire, put his hands to it, and looked into the flames with a sailor's annoyance. The Red Woman found truth in the fire sometimes, he said. But it lied just as often. Wildfire doesn't lie. It tells you exactly what it means to do. If I can smell it, I'll know. If Ser Jaime is the man I've been told he is today and not the man he once was, he'll know it too. Sansa folded the Raven's letter and slid it into her sleeve. Take what you need, she said. Go in quiet. Do not get caught. She glanced at the sword at Brienne's hip. And try not to kill anyone who doesn't deserve it. Podrick winced. Brienne inclined her head. Jon reached for his cloak and then for Ghost's thick ruff, and the direwolf's amber eyes watched him with a kind of thoughtful patience that always made Jon feel the world was deeper than he had words for. They rode the King's Road beneath a sky low with snow, then rain, then a hard gray that spat neither, as if deciding whether to hate them for being northerners or not. The country changed as they went, the pines thinning, the earth showing its long scars where the war had scored it. Houses stood with their eyes put out. Sometimes a child looked up from a field and stared at Jon as if he were a storybook knight passing, and then went back to digging stones from the frost. At an inn south of Harrenhal, they sat in a corner where the rafters wept sap and Brienne's helm on the table made everyone at the nearest 3 tables find their bread very interesting. Davos laughed into his cup. I wasn't made for halls, he said to no one. Men are the same in halls as they are on decks. If they throw up, you mop it, and if they lie, you learn to smell when it's a lie. The next day they crossed a river choked with black ice and found a road that had been repaired recently, patched with crushed shell. The city has rich bones, Davos grunted. She replenishes herself by eating the dead. King's Landing announced itself by smell before the walls showed. A mixture of tanner's piss, smoke, and old fruit. The walls themselves were a line of teeth against a bruised sky. The Red Keep looked more red when you knew what it had done. Jon took off the Stark fur and let the brown of a common cloak hide him. Brienne did not bother. No cloak would hide her. Podrick matched his steps to hers the way he always did, as if her shadow could shelter him. They had no trouble finding Bronn. King's Landing had a logic to it if you knew how men who want coin move toward coin. A cup of wine shared with a woman who knew a man whose brother had eaten chicken with a Sellsword led them to a courtyard where men were betting on dogs to catch a greased pig. Bronn looked them up and down and made the kind of grin that arrives at the same time as trouble. Well, If it isn't the tall drink of water and the boy king buried in fur. Pardon, your northernness. He tipped a mock bow. His eyes stopped on Davos. You, don't I know you? He sniffed. Ido. The smell of onions lingers longer in the nose than love. You know me because you tried to kill me once, Davos said evenly. Or your friends did, and you'd have if the coin were right. True of every friend I ever had, Bronn said. What brings you here, other than the pleasure of my company? Brienne did not waste words. We need to speak to Ser Jaime. In private. Bronn folded his arms and considered. He's got a king who thinks he's a priest and a sister who thinks she's a god tugging at his sleeves. Private's in short supply. But I might scrape up a moment if there's some money for scraping. Not this time, Davos said. There's a fire burning under your feet, Sel's word. Pay attention and you get to keep them. Bronn's grin did something difficult. It faltered without vanishing. He looked at Brienne again, and something in the set of her jaw, which had never learned to lie, spoke louder than coin. All right, come on then. Try not to look like you look. They went by back ways, through alleys where laundry fluttered like moths and girls watched from doorways with faces that had forgotten what childhood felt like. Bronn slid them past a gate guard with 3 words and a shared joke. The red keep rose over them like a red cliff, like a wound. Bronn whistled twice under his breath outside a door that held the smell of oiled leather and tired men. Jaime Lannister stood inside with Widow's wail at his hip and a fatigue behind his eyes that made him look older than he was. He turned at the sound and for a moment he looked at Brienne as a thirsty man looks at a well he knows he does not deserve to drink from. Then his gaze settled on Jon, on the stark jaw and the stark silence, and his mouth made a wry shape. If you're here to take my head for what I did to your father, he said, you're late. There are 7,000 ahead of you in line. That's not why we came, Jon said. We think your sister means to burn the city. Jaime laughed. He laughed without wanting to laugh, and his hand went to his stump as if it still had weight. You think, he said. Many men have thought my sister means many terrible things. Often they've been right. Davos stepped forward, and the way he did it made Jaime's eyes narrow. Men who have lived no other men who have lived. I've smelled wildfire, Davos said. I've watched it eat men like gulls eat cormorants, too quick to be decent. There's a stink to it in the vaults under the September. Your pet maester has been busy. Jaime's face tilted. For a heartbeat, something like fear moved behind his eyes and was masked quickly. My pet. The one you gave a chain without letting the Citadel's fingers touch it, Davos said. Qyburn. He was cutting boys open in Harrenhal and pretending it was healing. Brienne took one step closer and her voice shed every softness. I saw the cellars with my own eyes, though not the jars themselves. I saw guards where there were none before, and boys who look at the floor with their hands soft as bread. You know what that means as well as we do. I know you remember what Ares meant to do with his jars. I know you killed him because of it. Jaime did not move. He looked beyond them, beyond the wall behind them, beyond the city, as if he could see 40 years laid over his shoulder. In that moment Jon saw the boy he had been, all bright cruelty and shining, and how that had burned off him the way frost burns off in midday sun, leaving scars where the light had been. He exhaled. Come. They went by stairs men did not use unless they had to, down into the lower ways where the mortar oozed along the stone like fat. Guards stood in alcoves whose shadows smelled of piss. Jaime spoke 5 words and they let him pass. Bronn picked his teeth with a bit of straw to look harmless and only managed to look like a man who liked to pick his teeth with straw before he killed you. The cellars under the Sept of Baelor were older than the Sept itself, part of that honeycomb of tunnels that had been carved when the city was a cluster of huts and ambition. The air had that bright metallic edge wildfire gave off even when the jars were closed, an edge in Davos's nose he had not felt since his sons had died burning while water burned around them. He went white about the mouth. Jon touched him once at the shoulder, and Davos nodded without looking. Jaime went to his knees beside one jar and put his palm to it. The glass was cold, but beneath the cold there was a vibration like a crowd of tiny fists. He stood. "I'll be damned," he said, and then, after a moment, "We will all be damned if we don't stop this." "Your sister means to light it during her trial," Brienne said. The words felt coarse in her mouth. To say them was to take a thing that lived in shadows and pull it into the day. "It's what I would do if I were her and had lost so much I believed nothing left me but teeth." Jaime looked up at the stones above him as if he could see through them to the nave, to the pillars, to the masks and robes. The High Sparrow would be strutting under those stones in 2 days' time, certain of his righteousness. Margaery Tyrell would be there with a face like a shield shaped from charm. And Cersei. Cersei would be where Cersei was always most herself, in the quiet before the knife went in, composed and cold, beautiful as the kind of winter you die in. "No," Jaime said. "No more burning kings. I won't." He looked at Jon. "Can you get the king in the north an audience with the High Sparrow?" "You're Jaime Lannister," Bronn said dryly. "You could get a goat an audience with him if you promised the goat would confess." Jaime wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Lord Snow." "Jon," Jon said. "Jon," Jaime repeated, as if the word had a taste he'd found unexpectedly clean. "You saved my brother's life. I owe you for that at least. Come tomorrow morning to the September Bronn will get you in. I'll stand beside you and ruin the last of my reputation. If the old man listens, we evacuate the September and the houses around it, and if he doesn't, I'll make him listen," said a voice from the archway, so soft and so sure it made the hairs along Jon's neck rise. Margaery Tyrell stepped from the gloom like a dancer from behind a screen, the scent of roses misplaced beneath the earth. A Septa stood behind her, faintly scandalized. Margaery's eyes moved quickly, taking all of them in, weighing far too clever. "I had to hear it from your lips, Ser Jaime. I am tired of hearing things about the Queen from men who twist truth to win." Jaime bowed, grave for once. "It's truth this time." "Then my brother must know," Margaery said. "And his holiness. If there is a trap, we lift it without springing it. If there is a spark, we smother it. The king." Her mouth softened. She had grown used to saying that word as if it were a child's name. "Tommen must be safe." Jon found himself looking at her and seeing not just the charm that men had called artifice, but a woman who had learned to move through rooms full of knives without getting cut much. "The people must be safe too," he said. She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, something like weariness showed through the varnish. "Yes," she said. "All of them. They did not sleep. Men who carry important truths in their mouths cannot sleep. It reminds them too much of death." Bronn fetched them bread and a jug of something that tasted like it had been made at sword point. Dawn came gray through fog and fingered the city with watery light. The bells had not started yet, but their absence rang. In the September shadow, an army of the devout had gathered in their best clothes and worst habits. The High Sparrow stood upon the steps like a shepherd too pleased with the strength of his crook. When he saw Jaime, his smile had a knife in it. When he saw Margaery, he smoothed the knife. When he saw Jon, he considered, as if measuring him for penitence. Margaery was a river cutting through all of it, her words crisp as frost. "Your High Holiness," she said. "If you do not want to meet your God before you mean to, you will listen." She did not speak before men when she could avoid it, not like this. She had learned the ways of the stage from queens who had died on it. But she spoke now. She spoke of green fire bottled beneath the city and a boy king whose bones would be a story told by fish if they did not act. She spoke of Qyburn and boys with their tongues cut and of Ares and the man who had killed him to keep the city from becoming a pyre. She gestured once and the Kingslayer stepped forward and knelt without being asked. A man renouncing pride before a god he did not much respect. He put his hand on the stone and said, "By what honor I have." And for a moment Jon thought how honor can be born anew in a man like a second spring. The High Sparrow's eyes flicked. They were gray as ash. "You think me a fool, my lady?" he asked kindly. "I think you a shepherd," Margaery said. "And I think the wolves are not where you think they are." She stepped nearer, and the rose scent broke like a memory. "Please." The High Sparrow had built his power upon stones other men had ignored. A woman's heart, a boy's shame, a city's hunger for punishment. But he was not without care for the flock, or at least for the narrative in which he saved it. He made a tiny gesture. Brothers in sackcloth went into the September's belly with torches. You could feel the instant their light touched the jars. A tremor through stone, like the city inhaling sharply. They came back up with faces like men who had seen the inside of a whale. One carried a candle stub with green grease on it, and every person on those steps saw it and felt a bit colder. The High Sparrow looked down at the stub and then at the crowd and lifted his hands as if he meant to bless them all and punish them all in the same breath. "The city is in danger," he said gently. "Go home. Pray in your houses. The Father's justice is patient. Today we will see it in the open air." The evacuation was a miracle that looked like a market day gone wrong. Men ran their wives by the hand and children laughed without understanding, and old people peered from doorways with expressionless eyes. The faith mill. Itons stood like posts and funneled bodies along, and Marjorie moved among them with a smile like a prayer. Jon stood with Davos at the mouth of one of the vault stairs and smelled the green broken tooth scent of wildfire and thought of cold skies and dead men with blue eyes. South had its own white walkers with softer hands. Qyburn stood in an upper corridor of the Red Keep and watched ants scatter. He only smiled when men did what he had predicted they would do. He did not smile now. Cersei looked 9/10 marble, 1/10 glass. Glass breaks more easily than stone, but you can cut yourself to pieces on it. "What have they done?" she said, very soft. The mountain stood behind her like a mountain. "They smelled it," Qyburn said, "or guessed. It is possible that your brother, Jaime, would never." Her mouth trembled. "Jaime is not a man who kneels before beggars. Men kneel before truth when they are tired of kneeling to lies," Qyburn said, and saw the blow land. He inclined his head. "I can light it anyway, my queen. The candles in the catacombs." "The boy they caught will squeal," said a small voice. A little bird. Blood dried at the corner of his mouth where someone had cuffed him. Qyburn did not look at the child. "There will be men in the vaults. Too many eyes. The faith will line the streets. The boy king will be rushed to the great September steps, and all the city will be looking. If there is a spark, it will be seen, stopped." Cersei put both hands on the balcony rail until her knuckles looked like bone. "They would do this to me," she said. "They would humiliate me again. If I were a man, no one would dare." "That is likely true," Qyburn said. He did not say what else was true. That if she were a man, she would not be Cersei and he would not love her as he did. "Your Grace," he said softly. "If they strip you of place, you will not be finished. You are never finished." She did not answer. Her face turned slightly, enough to find the small figure standing in the doorway with hair as pale as afternoon beer and a mouth he did not yet know how to hold in a straight line. "Tommen," she said. "Beloved." "You were going to burn them," he said. He said it like a bewildered boy whose birthday present had turned to ash in his hands. Marjorie stood just behind him, her fingers light on his sleeve. She had advised him to come, of course. She had done it with eyes and breath and a moment's pause between words. The worst cages are the ones the bird doesn't know has a door. Cersei looked at her son, her king, as if he were an actor who had forgotten his lines. "I was going to save you," she said. "From them." His throat worked. His voice was dry. "You were going to kill them all." This was the moment Qyburn had prepared for. "Your Grace," he said, stepping into the soft place with the surgeon's hands. "There is a way to satisfy all parties. You must be merciful, as your lady wife has taught you to be. Spare your mother's life. But for the sake of the city and the faith, remove her from her offices. She will abdicate the regency. She will retire to Casterly Rock with a guard, and will cease to meddle in governance. Her trial will be suspended. The faith will accept this. If the people see a queen who does not set herself above judgment but submits to exile and prayer." Cersei turned her head slowly. "Exile?" she asked, as if it were a word in a language she used for enemies. Her eyes returned to Tommen. "Realization is a fire too. It changes whatever it touches. You would send me away." She said it as if she were tasting poison and recognizing it for wine. Tommen flinched. Marjorie's fingers tightened. The smallest pressure. "Mother," he said, "please, I don't want you to die." There was a child on those steps outside who would have died without ever having his first beard. That child had no crown. Kings die too. Cersei looked past Tommen at Marjorie, and Marjorie did the kindest thing she could and did not look away. The girl had learned how to be brave around wolves. "Keep your sept," Cersei said at last, her voice something broken. "Keep your god. I will keep my son." Her eyes slid to Qyburn. "Do it," she said. They did it. The High Sparrow announced mercy with his mouth shaped like a bowl. The crowd murmured. "Novelsrang." Qyburn's little birds hid their bleeding hands. The trial for Loras never happened. The squire stood in a narrow cell and felt guilt like a slick stone squeezed in his fist, and then felt the door open and Marjorie's voice in the space behind him telling him to go to his sister, to go to Highgarden where the water still sang. Jaime stood on the sept steps with one hand on the hilt at his side and watched as his sister handed over the symbol of regency. Cold and brittle as glass, and he felt something in his chest he could not name, equal parts relief and grief. He remembered putting his sword through a king's back to save a city he had been told to love, and learning that the city loved the story of him killing better than it loved the truth of why. He thought of Brienne's eyes on him in the vault. He thought of the way Jon had simply said "we go" as if the word were a post he could lash a ship to. The Queen Mother went to Casterly Rock. The rock had always been more legend than holding. Men spoke of its gold and forgot the smell of its sea. Cersei rode with a guard of 50 men too well dressed to be truly dangerous, and Qyburn, who traveled with a trunk of things that clinked faintly when lifted. Jaime did not go with her. He stood on a balcony and watched her litter vanish like a crumb thrown to birds, then found Brienne in a quiet gallery and said, with no charm at all, "I did the right thing, didn't I?" "You did," she said. He almost believed her. The city seethed. There is no mercy without resentment. For every woman who blessed Marjorie in the market, there were 2 who spat when she had passed and thought of the sons a trial would have fed to the cause. The High Sparrow's flock bleated their victory in the squares, and the men who sold bread sold the idea with it. The city had been spared by prayer. Davos breathed, and sometimes the smell of that old burning at Blackwater reached him across memory and made his hand tighten on his cup. Jon stood at the parapet and looked seaward and northerly, the only directions he trusted. You could feel winter under your boots even this far south, a hardness in water and men. When the raven came from Dragonstone, it came at night, a black leaf drifting down. Tyrion Lannister's hand was in its fold. Jon recognized the logic, the balance. The letter named a place where sea met rock and gave a date and a phrase, "We do not have to meet as enemies." It was Varys's doing, too, the little spider sense that the web shook different when a city did not burn. Daenerys Targaryen had set her feet on Westeros in a much quieter way than the stories would have liked. She had landed at Dragonstone the way a daughter comes back to a ruined house, first touching the walls like a mourner, then opening shutters to let the light in. Sansa read the letter with her head tipped like a listening bird. "The last time a Targaryen sent a letter inviting us to parley," she said, "the personalities were different. Last time, they had a father who wanted king's blood for candles," Davos said. "This one has dragons." He rubbed the stump of his fingers. "And a hand who knows this city's secrets. He'll know the stinks. He'll know the jars." Jon folded the letter and looked at the sea. "We should go." Brienne did not like leaving Sansa. Sansa did not like her leaving either, but liked the thought of her brother going alone less. Davos would go regardless. Podrick had nothing to say about any of it. He simply packed, quiet as a mouse packing a giant's bolt case. They crossed to Dragonstone on a ship that pitched and groaned. Storms lived around that island like faithful dogs. The causeway was familiar to Jon from stories. A spine of black rock reaching toward a fortress that crouched under a sky the color of iron. On the causeway itself he saw them, 2 figures and a dragon. The dragon did not look like anyone's story had prepared him to see. It was flesh and terror and a beauty that had nothing to do with politics. Drogon breathed like a forge. Tyrion came down 3 steps and smiled in a way that made you forget everything he had lost. "Lord Snow," he said, "we keep meeting under awful circumstances. I should like once to meet you in a garden. Perhaps this spring." "Spring," Jon said, and the word had a new wildness. "I would like to see one." He was presented to Daenerys Targaryen. She had the manner of someone who had been told all her life she was owed something and had learned, bitterly, that you must still work to take what is owed. She spoke first politely, then sharply, then, when that did not move Jon, carefully. He had come to ask for fire and stone, dragonglass in quantities large enough to arm the north for when the wall's last fracture gave way. She had come to ask for a bending of the knee. The conversation sat on the table between them like a plated fish no one could quite bring themselves to eat. In the end, Tyrion did what Tyrion did best. He found the seam and worried it open. "There are 2 kinds of pride in the world," he said, pouring wine that tasted like memory. "There is the pride that makes men throw gold cups at servants. And there is the pride that makes men stand up in a room full of enemies and say the thing everyone knows is true. I've seen you do both, your grace. Forgive me." He raised the cup. "Let us make a trade. Give Jon Snow his rock. Let him arm his people. And let him show you this enemy that makes even northern men forget to raise their hackles at Targaryen words. The Night King won't bend the knee either, I hear." Daenerys looked at the big window seaward and did not move. The dragon outside made a noise like thunder in a throat. "If he lies," she said. "He won't," Tyrion said. "He is terrible at it." They made an agreement in ink and spit. The work started at once. Men and women from the north turned stone to knives. Gendry, found in a forge as if the city had spat him out of its mouth to the place he belonged, hammered the black glass until it gleamed. He liked Davos because Davos spoke truth to him without using big words, and he liked Jon because Jon held a hammer better than most lords he had seen. He ran with a grin beside men from islands he had never imagined and a woman who wore a wolf on her breast and moved like she had taught herself never to hesitate again. The cave walls at Dragonstone told old stories if you put your hand to them. Jon did, one night, with a torch guttering beside him, and saw crude drawings of men and woods and spirals, and something in him bristled, a wolf raising its head. When they brought a plan to King's Landing, they brought it to a city that had survived itself for a fortnight and now resumed the habit of thinking its troubles were unique. The plan was simple and idiotic. It had the idiot simplicity of most plans that worked. They would bring a piece of the North's winter to the south and show it writhing like a fish on the floor. It required men to go north of the wall with the conjoined wisdom of a bear and a fox and bring back something that did not want to be brought back. Tyrion said it was madness and then adjusted the details until madness had enough servants to pass for a court. Jon told Sansa only part of it. Sansa told him he was a fool. "A clever one," she said, eyes bright with anger tears no winter had yet frozen. "With clever friends, but a fool. Don't die." "I have," he said, almost without thinking. She ran a hand over her braid. It didn't take. Beyond the wall, the air had a sound to it, a tiny humming in the blood. The hound came because fire spoke to him in surly metaphors, and Tormund because he liked the idea of telling a story of stealing a dead man under the nose of the dead, and Jorah because he had learned a habit of loyalty he could not shake even when the object of it had given him nothing to hold. Beric came because he no longer understood what else to do except let his sword catch fire and call that destiny. Gendry went with them and ran back when he had to, his legs making up for all the luck he had never had. Men died as they always did. The lake was a mirror the dead had made. The island of rock on which they stood was a lie told by a god who liked sick jokes. Dragons came when men were sure dragons could not come. Drogon's roar had more of life in it than anything Jon had heard in weeks. The cold cracked under the heat like glass under a hammer. They climbed onto the back of a myth. The Night King stood and looked up with eyes like coins under water and taught them what arrogance cost. Viserion fell like a star and broke the world in a way no wildfire ever had. Later, Daenerys stood on the wall at Eastwatch and wept without sound as the dead dragon rose, and men watched the blue in his eyes and learned new words for fear. When the wall fell, it fell not like a wall but like a piece of the sky. The sound rolled through the spine of the world and woke ravens in their nests and made babies spit milk. In King's Landing men looked up and thought the sea had made that noise, and in Winterfell Bran closed his eyes and followed cold as a thread through a maze until he stood in a wood he had never stood in with his body and saw a boy he had known die again. The dragon pit meeting that followed was both smaller and larger than the one that would have been had Cersei still held power. There was no queen in a dress like night. There was a boy king with a hand that trembled and a wife whose mouth never did. The High Sparrow had to be invited because he had made himself a gate through which things must pass. He came with smugness and sandals. Tyrion did not let him speak much. They brought the white up from the cart with chains. It fell snarling into the hard sun. So out of place it made men laugh before they went quiet. The hound kicked the box. The thing came out like a secret let loose, took a sword through it and still scrabbled. It made itself into a lesson, dumb and unanswerable. The High Sparrow's face changed. There are truths that slide off such men, and there are truths that wedge in. Abomination, he said, hoarse, and crossed himself. God's 7 eyes. God has 1 eye in the north, the hound said rudely. An ugly blue one. Tommen did not speak for a while. When he did, his voice had gotten older. We'll fight them, he said. The realm will fight them, Marjorie said for him and looked at Tyrion. Will your queen fight them without burning the people she saves? The question was a knife with a rose carved into the hilt. Daenerys's face moved. She thought of a city under her. She thought of a father with wildfire in his mouth. Yes, she said, and when she said it, she believed it. She had not believed it entirely before. The armies moved. War does not look like the banners people draw for it. It looks like men sleeping under carts and pissing in ditches and trying to remember which part of a horse gets cold first. It looks like women binding wounds and not saying how many times they have done it. It looks like ravens going black against the snow until there are no ravens left to go. The Lannisters came because Jaime came, because he took Widow's Wail from the wall where it had been hanging like a rich man's boast and learned that the sword had a use after all. He said goodbye to Cersei at Casterly Rock and she did not ask him to stay. She told him what he was and he told her what he refused to be again. Qyburn watched from a shadow and knew what he would have to build now that the queen had been unmade not by death but by restraint. A myth for the exile to live on. The dead moved like weather. They went over the riverlands, and the trident froze in an instant so clean it looked like a mirror. Men saw themselves running to die. They made a stand at Winterfell because there was nowhere else good to make one. The old gods watched without blinking. Bran sat by the heart tree and let the white bark touch his skin and receded from himself like tide leaving a rock. He was bait. He did not like the word, but he understood it. They set fires that fire could not love and lines that lines could not hold. Unsullied stood as if their lives were a coin someone else had weighed and found indispensable. Dothraki died in a wave that did not break. Lysene bows spoke. Dornish spears whispered. The Lannister red was the last bit of summer in that field. Jaime rode in it with his jaw set like armor and found himself next to Brienne twice without meaning it. The second time, she pulled him from his horse and he felt humiliation like a hot drink and gratitude after. Yora died as he would have wished, face turned to a woman he had followed from desert to damp cold. His mouth having learned, finally, to say only the words that mattered. Theon Greyjoy found himself with a boy under a tree who was also a thing older than iron and he stood his ground. And when he fell, it was to something that could not understand what courage was, which is perhaps the purest way to spend it. Davos killed twice and the third time saw a boy with a beard hardly begun and let him live because death had had its fill that hour and Davos preferred to cheat when the house wasn't watching. Jon saw the Night King once on the field, and the sight froze his breath. The thing's face had the stillness of slate. Longclaw hummed in his hand. He tried to go to him. The dead closed as if the Night King were pulling a cloak around himself. A dragon came through the clouds and made a tunnel for them in the air. Regal roared and the sound went through Jon's bones and made something in him answer. He was closer to dragon than he had ever been to king. Arya Stark moved through the battle like ink through paper. Men did not see her. She heard a girl's voice in her head saying not today and realized the voice belonged to an older woman and a younger one and to herself. She had a knife that had been given to her by a man who had been supposed to use it and had not. She meant to use it. She moved toward the weirwood because everything moved toward the weirwood. She found cold there and a silence that was deeper than any she had learned in Bravos. The Night King moved toward Bran and the air moved with him. An absence. Theon lay near the tree like a letter no one had delivered. Jon fought to reach them and realized that the battle did not care where he was. Dany saw him from above and turned Drogon, and suddenly a rain of dead fell from the dragon's back like lice shaken from a comb. The Night King looked up at the dragon and did not smile. Exactly. But there was recognition. He raised his hand. Jon shouted. Drogon's fire ran over the Night King like a river over rock. Rock does not care for water. The thing kept walking. Arya came out of shadow the way a knife comes out of a sleeve. For a heartbeat, the Night King turned his head, as if remembering the smell of a house long ago. Arya's knife went for where his ribs should have been. A white hand that had once been a man's hand closed around her throat. The knife dropped, and then it did what it had done once before. She caught it with the other hand as if it had been thrown to her by someone behind her and drew it up. It went into him with no more sound than frost breaking. The world unhooked. Later, Jon would think of that sound when he thought of the day he saw his mother in the face of his father's sister. He would think of it when he let Sansa put a crown on his head that was not a crown and call him king in the north. Again when what he felt like was a man in a field trying not to be cold. The dead fell as if someone had cut the strings of 1,000 puppets. Drogon screamed and the sound outlasted the echo. The Night King cracked. If there had been bile in him, it would have burned green. There was nothing. He died like a lie undone. After it was done, they stood in a world that sounded wrong. Quiet rang. Snowflakes fell, ordinary and small, as if they needed to practice being harmless again. They burned the bodies that would burn and buried the ones that would not be insulted by fire. Melisandre walked out over the snow like a woman who had come to attend her own death and peeled years from herself as if that were a dress and lay down. And the old man she had carried inside fell away. Dany stood with Jon on the battlements of a castle that had never been meant for dragon shadows and breathed the cold like something new. "I came here to take a throne," she said, almost to herself. "Is it still the same throne?" Jon had learned more true things about himself in the last year than he had in all the years before. He had learned that truth isn't a sword. It's a place to stand. "I don't know," he said. "But the people didn't ask for this, and we keep giving them things they didn't ask for. They didn't ask for your father. They didn't ask for mine to die. They didn't ask for snow in summer or fire that eats water." She looked at him. "They might ask for you." He shook his head. "I'm tired of being asked for." Tyrion made arrangements in the back rooms and wondered if this time he could hatch a kingdom rather than crack one. Sansa came south with a small guard, measured the capital with her eyes, and smiled the little smile of a woman who remembers exactly who hurt her and doesn't intend to let anyone do it again. Marjorie ruled from Tommen's side with a grace that had knives stitched under it. She cut the faith down with paper and presents. The High Sparrow, having seen something that frightened him more than lack of control, retired with ceremony and a reputation, and men shoved him in the streets for old favor. Cersei in exile was like a caged cat that has not learned the bars cannot move. Qyburn warmed his hands on her anger and built things for her that looked like security if you looked from far away. Euron came once with eyes like wet graves and laughter like a bruise. "Let me put a queen on a throne," he said. "Any queen." Cersei sent him away with a word, and Qyburn dispatched a boy to poison a man who had laughed too loudly afterward. Because sometimes you must comb snarls out of a mane even if you have no horse to ride. Jaime came to Casterly Rock before spring and did not remove his glove. He brought news instead. He told Cersei how the dead had died and how the living had chosen, for once, not to betray themselves. He told her of a girl with a knife, and she made a little sound like contempt. "Arya Stark," she said. "I always did hate little girls who grew into women." She moved toward him. "You have come to gloat." "No," he said. "I have come because the realm needs you to stay where you are and not wound it again." She laughed, and the laugh had wine in it and pain. You would keep me locked here. I would keep a promise to a boy who loved you because you were his mother, Jaime said, and the words cut him as he said them, but he held fast. And I would keep a promise to a city I saved once and might save again. You think yourself a hero, she said softly. I think myself a man who knows what fire can do, he said. I know exactly who I am, Cersei. I know exactly who you are. He took a step, and the hand he no longer had moved, as if it could still reach for her throat and hold it the way the prophecy had whispered. And he stopped, and he did not then. She looked at him and saw where he had stopped and smiled as if she had one. Qyburn saw the pause and tucked it away like a bit of string he might need for a device later. Marjorie sent a letter to the Rock 3 weeks later, couched as courtesy, reminding Cersei gently of the terms of her abdication and the mercy that had been shown. Cersei's fingers crumpled it and then smoothed it with care and hid it under a cushion, and Qyburn took it later and smelled the perfume and thought of how fire changes form. It might have ended like that, with a queen in exile and a boy king growing into a man with a wife who knew how to place her hand just so on the world's shoulder. It might have ended with Jon going north and learning how to be content, and Daenerys learning how to rule in a way that did not make her father's voice creep into hers. It might have ended with Tyrion teaching a generation to talk before they stabbed. But the world is made by the places it does not end. A rumor came south across the golden fields that certain stores of wildfire were missing. Not the jars beneath the September, not the jars under the stables, not the half-forgotten casks in the harbor tunnels. Small ones, experimental ones, the kind a curious mind uses when it does not want to be watched. It took time for rumor to become fact. Qyburn had been careful, but men like him always think themselves more careful than they are. Bronn brought the first true notice, flipping a coin across his fingers as if practicing an art. You've got a rat chewing on a fuse at the Rock, he told Tyrion in the Red Keep Solar. I'd keep cats close. Jaime rode for the Rock again. Brienne rode with him because Sansa asked, and because it is harder to sin when someone who believes in you watches. They went without a banner because banners have too much history. Jaime did not tell anyone what he meant to do if he found what he thought he might. He did not tell himself. Men are kind to themselves like that. It was not spring exactly. The trees had begun to think of leaves. The sea had loosened its jaw around the Rock. Jaime went straight to the lower levels, not trusting staterooms where conversations watched themselves. He found the first jar in a place where only rats and men who had been rats would go. He found another beneath a guardroom. He found a third hidden inside a statue that had once held a sword and now held the city's liver in zeal. He went to Cersei without knocking. She sat at a window with her hair unbound, which had always meant something when they were younger. It meant trust and it meant pride. You're brave, she said. Or stupid. You're lighting fuses with your eyes, he said. She smiled. If a city will not love you, you make it fear you. If a husband will not rule, you put your hand on his wrist and make him think he has decided what you told him. If a brother will not love you as he did, you find a way to remind him what it was like. He took 2 steps and the room changed its shape around those steps. He could smell the sea through the window and something else that was not the sea. It was not yet in the air. It was in his blood, a memory of green. No more, he said, and his voice had something soft in it that made it worse than a shout. No more kings burned. No more sons thrown from windows. No more stories that break what is left in me and ask me to like the sound. You are weak, she said. She stood. You cannot make yourself do it even now. Prophecy makes cowards, not killers. He let go of the glove with his teeth, and the gold hand lay on the floor between them like something that had outlived its use. He put his fingers, his left ones, the ones he had taught to hold, around her throat. He held her the way you hold a secret you are deciding to tell. She did not struggle at first. The muscles in her neck flexed. Her eyes went hot and gold. He remembered the girl she had been, the meat seller's daughter's smell in the streets of Lannisport when they had gone slumming to feel ordinary. He remembered her hands. Jaime, she said. She said it like a key turned in a lock the wrong way. And for a heartbeat, He thought he would break and release and call this mercy and leave and let the world find some other man to cut the right knot with the right knife at the right time. But he saw in her eyes what Qyburn had seen there, what the city had seen and knelt to and feared. A fire that did not understand that what it burned was the same as what it lived among. He tightened his hand. It took longer than the stories ever suggested, which is how you know stories lie. When she died, the room changed weight. He let her down gently. He kissed her brow and tasted salt and the sharpness of his own teeth in his mouth. He stood looking at her until his legs began to shake. Then he went and found Qyburn. Qyburn did not beg. He explained as if he had been asked to explain. He spoke of necessity and the failure of lesser minds to tolerate what they could not understand. He had a small packet of powder in his hand which would have set things going had he lived 3 moments more. Brienne took the packet. Jaime took Qyburn's life. It looked like a thick thread breaking. They burned Cersei on the sea's edge because there was no one left who would dare raise a tomb for her without starting a quarrel that would never end. The smoke went straight up. The wind had died. Jaime stood with his stump hidden and his left hand unloved, and afterward, he sat on a stone and did not move until night rose. Brienne waited because that is what you do for people when there is no counsel you can offer that would be worth its weight in words. They went back to King's Landing without fanfare, and Jaime did not go up the Red Keep stairs. He walked to the stables where he had hidden as a boy to get away from men who wanted things from him, and sat with his back against a stall and closed his eyes. Tyrion found him there. They did not speak much. They had spent their words for the month. Tyrion poured wine and set it beside him, and Jaime drank, and later they laughed at something very small, and it sounded like boys in the dark. The realm arranged itself into a shape that would not bleed too quickly. Margaery read a charter with Tommen's hand in hers and ceded certain powers to a council of lords and commons that would not be laughed at outright. She made small things happen that made big men angry and women relieved. Dorne sent a prince with a temperance that made northerners uneasy and a wit that made small folk love him. The Iron Islands argued among themselves in their old damp way until Asha's crews started taking prizes and men followed her because it was better to win than sulk. Daenerys did not burn the city. She learned what governance tasted like when you do not drink it from a cup carved from dragonbone. She stood at the dragon pit and spoke to men who had thought themselves kings and did not raise her voice. She visited the places the wildfire jars had been and touched the stones, and then went to a night market and bought a little carved dog for a child whose mother had not had enough meat for him all winter and gave him the dog and then the meat. Drogon curled on the hillside outside the city like night that had decided to sit and watch instead of sweep. Jon came and went. He was happier away from clever rooms. He stayed long enough to be reminded that he was necessary as a symbol whether he liked it or not. Sansa came long enough to be sure no one was building a story that would eat them later. Arya stood in the sunlight and listened to the sound of merchants bargain and thought of water that did not show her enemies' faces. Bran sat under a tree in the gods' wood where summer had once lay and was both boy and more than boy and somewhere else entirely. And sometimes, when ravens turned over the city at dusk, the city looked up and felt watched and did not resent it. Jaime rode north once, without anyone asking him to, and stood in the courtyard of Winterfell with the cold making his hair sting, and felt that he had walked into a tale he had once heard at a fire. Brienne sparred with Arya and lost twice and laughed on the third and won. Jon watched them and felt something in him unclench. He took Jaime to the crypts. They stood before a stone figure with a face that had never been carved to look like truth. "I did not kill him," Jaime said, perhaps to defend himself against the stone. "But I helped it happen." "Everyone did," Jon said. They stood without speaking for a while. The cold in the crypt had a courtesy to it that the cold out of doors did not. There were councils that winter with men who enjoyed the sound of their own names in their mouths and women who had learned to make men think the world their idea. Tyrion began to look like a man who had found the work he had been made for. He did not drink more or less than before. He did it with a purpose now. He walked the city with Varys and learned which baker had not enough flour and which captain would take a bribe if you did not insult him with too little coin. He visited the September and bowed to no god with 7 faces. He visited the dragon pit at dusk when no one was there and looked at the old bones set in stone and felt less alone. When spring came, it was timid. The first flowers looked like apologies. Children ran out to find out whether it was serious and came back pink-nosed, laughing. There was a feast at the Red Keep where no one died. Jon sat near Dany and did not touch her hand and noticed with relief that he did not hurt with the wanting to. Sansa danced once and only tripped once and laughed at herself without spice. Marjorie introduced laws at the end of the feast that turned 3 lesser lords purple, and the small folk at the tables below leaned to hear and realized, for the first time in a long time, that their lives might be part of the story. Far to the west, by the sea, on a rock shaped like an old lion with his head bent, a fire burned out and did not catch anything but the air above it. Sometimes, at night, Jaime woke and heard Cersei saying his name and spent an hour not thinking about what it had felt like to put his hands around the throat of the only woman he had ever loved. He did not repent. He did not glory. He went on. Brienne sat with him sometimes and did not tell him how to feel. One evening he took out Widow's Wail and it looked less like a boast and more like a tool, and he laughed to himself at how swords were like men. What they thought they were for was rarely what they were used for in the end. On a morning so clear it looked like a lie, Davos took a skiff out into Blackwater Bay and dropped a little parcel into the water. A bit of bread and a ribbon from a boy's hair, and a bit of rust from a ship's nail he had carried in his pocket for 20 years. He spoke his sons' names and then stopped because the names had begun to sound like prayer and he didn't like praying. The water closed over the parcel without ceremony. He rode back and sat with Gendry in the sun outside the forge and told a joke that made no sense unless you had once been hungry at sea, and Gendry laughed because it made Davos laugh. The city learned, slowly, to breathe like a place that expected to keep breathing. The scars under it did not go away. No city forgets its burns. Sometimes, when the light at dusk hit the steps of the September just so, men looked at the stone and saw the green that had not happened, the fire that had not come, and felt a tremor in their bones as if their flesh remembered almost perishing. Bran told Jon one evening, in the dark that makes brothers honest, the story of a man and a woman in a tower and a name hidden like a seed. Jon listened because he had learned to. He did not tell many. He told Dany because she had to know, and watched the way she handled it, the way the story bent her and did not break her because she had refused to let it. He told Sansa because he told Sansa things he did not tell anyone else. He did not tell Marjorie, though she likely guessed. Marjorie was learning to build a realm that did not require the correct lineage so much as the correct care. They never hung tapestries in the Red Keep that showed the day a boy king asked his mother to abdicate for love. They could have. It would have made a pretty picture. They did not show the men in the vaults with the candles and the jars in that old green. They could have. It would have frightened people in the correct way. People remembered anyway. They told each other that a man from the snow had come at the right time and said the right thing, and that another man who had once murdered a king because fire was coming had knelt and said the words that needed saying. They told each other that a queen had not burned them when she could have, and that a woman with roses had smiled them into an army. In the years to come, when the first rumors of drought returned and boys thought it fun to make fireworks that glowed green in the markets, old men cuffed them and said no. When a child stood in front of the old Great September steps and asked his mother why the stone there felt colder than other stone, she told him a story about how cities have hearts just like people, and sometimes those hearts get scared and beat too fast, and afterward you can always feel where the beating was. When men raised their cups to spring, they drank to girls who leapt and boys who stood, to a lion who closed his hand and opened it again, to a smuggler who learned to live and not just survive, to a queen who learned to rule and not just desire, and to a man who had said we go when it had mattered. Jon kept the letter Bran had written, the one with the 3 circles, in the bottom of a wooden chest with a hinge that creaked. Sometimes he took it out and held it. It had lost the smell of the raven and gained the smell of his hands. Under the sept of the big city, Bran had written, "Fire that thinks itself God. Do not let them ring." Below those lines, in a hand more practiced now, Jon later wrote, "We did not." He didn't show it to anyone. It was enough that it was written down, that something had been prevented as a kind of deed. When the first real spring rain came after the long, studious thaw, it came with a sound like laughter on tiles. Children ran out to catch it in their mouths. In the gods' wood, the leaves shivered and seemed to breathe. On the rock, the sea took a breath of its own and sighed out. In the dragon pit, weeds tried to be brave. In King's Landing, men argued over bread with less anger than before. Women argued over cloth with more. The bells did ring again for weddings and births and once for a victory somewhere no one in the city cared much about. When they did, the sound went out over the roofs and did not find a jar waiting. It found air and went on. And beneath the city, in the places where Qyburn had once walked and smiled and imagined himself god of a green world, there was only dust. Lantern light bled into it and made no response. Rats shuffled in it and left no green behind. Men sealed the doors and hung charms and forgot them and moved on. The stone remembered where fire had almost been and was content to hold the echo of the feet that had turned away.